This is Pod Strangely Warmed, a place where we tell the good Methodist story, where we have conversations that invite followers of Jesus to seek after that loving, just, and free world that God imagines for us all, and have a little fun along the way. Hi, and welcome to Pod Strangely Warmed. I'm Daniel Hawkins, your host, and today we continue in the season of preparation for the global gathering of United Methodist called General Conference 2020 that's happening in 24. If you were with us last week on the podcast, we were blessed by Dr. Clayton Oliphant and Kim Simpson, the clergy head delegate from the North Texas Conference and the lay head delegate from the Central Texas Conference, to help prepare us on what is General Conference and what is the beginnings of this thing called regionalization that is going to be considered, and what we might expect coming in to General Conference this time. Today on the podcast, as we continue this conversation, we are blessed to be joined by Dr. Tim Bruster, the lead clergy delegate for the Central Texas Conference, and Kelly Carpenter, the lead lay delegate for the North Texas Conference. Thank you both for being here today and for helping our annual conferences go into General Conference as prepared and non-anxious as possible. And so as we think about General Conference, Kim gave us a great overview last week of where it fits. We had a micro Methodist version of the U.S. civics lesson that tells us how the legislature works and all of that good stuff. When you guys think about General Conference, I don't want to hear about the structure of it right now. I want to think about a personal experience that you guys have had at General Conference that maybe gives you a window into what it might be at its best. What is General Conference? Kelly, can you start us?
Yeah, I'd love to. So for me, it's connection. We talk about the connection a lot, but General Conference has been that experience. I've only been in 16, 19, and then now this will be my third. But I grew up in the Desert Southwest Annual Conference, and my former youth group has been a delegate from there. And so getting to see him on the floor, and now he serves as clergy in the North Texas Conference. So that's just also wonderful. But people that I've served with from Arizona to Wisconsin, getting to see them again and see how they were part of the broader connection, even as my life has moved to Texas, and then new connections, right, across the country and across the world, people that I get to visit with and just share meals with, learn about, and see that unique connection of being United Methodist draws us together. I love that.
I love that. General Conference can be a place where that connectional identity, right, moves from being aspirational or theoretical to lived and real, with shared meals and good conversations with folks you haven't seen in a while. What a gift. I'm looking forward to that. Tim, what would you say is one of the best things or best moments of General Conference for you in the times you've been? Because you've been to a few at this point.
Yeah, 2008, 2012, 16, 19. So this will be my fifth. Connection, I agree with what Kelly said. I mean, just making those connections, especially after you've been involved in the General Church for a while, you know more and more people, and you only get to see them rarely, I know, at meetings. And so General Conference is a great way to reconnect. And then to experience the worldwide nature of the church is really powerful. Yeah. I mean, to see people with their own way of dressing, with all the languages, and to be able to sit down at a table and to talk with someone and to learn something about where they come. It's a great experience. And then worship. General Conference worship is always amazing.
Okay.
And very powerful experience. And it's done, there's a whole worship team that starts way in advance of the General Conference, planning out how that's going to go. And it's just excellent. And so I really appreciate. And when something moves through the legislative process, and there seems to be real agreement, consensus in the body about that, I think that's a powerful moment. I mean, it reminds us that there's so much that we share in common, and so much that we all care about or even passionate about. When that happens, that's a nice thing.
Well, any legislative process that can build consensus must be empowered by the Holy Spirit.
Yes.
Right.
Oh, yes.
At least our American witness has proven that it needs some Holy Spirit in the midst of that to build toward some consensus there. I love that you both talk about connection, right? Because it is a critical part of our identity as United Methodists, is that we live in this connectional reality. I've joked on the podcast before, I like to play 7 Degrees of Methodist Kevin Bacon, right? Where we always find somebody who knows somebody who knows somebody who knows somebody. I think I can get to nearly every annual conference within the United States that way, right? People, we're not all Kelly Carpenter. We don't all know everybody from around all over creation here, right? But it's a beautiful thing. But General Conference helps us both make those connections new and renew those along the way. It's been a while since we had General Conference, right? This is General Conference 2020 happening in 24. And if you live in a very small segment of Methodist nerd internet culture, you know that there have been plenty of memes that have been made to celebrate that, poke fun at that. Anyway, in that process, it's been a while since we've had this chance to be together in this meaningful way. And a lot has changed since 2019. A lot has changed in our midst. And one of the biggest things that has changed in our own neck of the woods, and I think globally, is the impact of disaffiliation. And this General Conference will be unlike some other ones because of the impact of disaffiliation. As we move into this, I think some of our listeners may be listening with the expectation that this General Conference might follow the pattern of ones that have been the previous 50 years or so, where we're coming in ready for a fight, right? We got our boxing gloves on, and is our side going to win, right? We're going to score this punch this way or this punch, whatever. Disaffiliation has not ended all of that, but it certainly has changed the tenor of the conversation coming in this time, right? It seems to me to be a conversation less about winning and losing. Tim, you've been on the inside, at least here in Central Texas, of a lot of kind of the processing and dealing with and planning around and through this disaffiliation process. And I know you've got connections across the jurisdiction and across the United States and across the globe on that front. What would you name as kind of the impact of disaffiliation coming in to 2020 in 2024?
Right. Well, let me speak about the hopeful piece of that. And I think since a number of people who were delegates at General Conference have disaffiliated, then I think there is the real possibility that there will be more consensus at General Conference. I think also, as we have witnessed the destruction of disaffiliation in many cases, what it's done to local churches, quite often, what it's done to relationships. I think that having witnessed to that, and I'm talking about the witness of people worldwide seeing what has happened in the United States particularly, then I think there is a sense that people want to take a step back from that and not go down that road. For example, in the central conferences where they really haven't gone down that road. And they really want to, they understand the importance of the unity of the church. They understand how destructive it can be when a local church takes a vote or something like that, no matter which way the vote goes. And what that does to relationships and to the Christian witness. So I think my hope is that we will go into this more in the spirit of holy conferencing than we often have done in the past. I mean, and then in terms of the effect of disaffiliation on the denomination, I mean, one of the big effects, and it's not just disaffiliation, but also inflation and other challenges that churches are dealing with financially. But the budget of the general that we will vote on at General Conference is a 43% reduction.
Okay.
And that's an effect largely of disaffiliation and lost revenue from giving, in those churches that we lost.
Because when you name a 43% drop in general church budget, the number I saw that, you can correct me if it's inaccurate, that roughly 23% or so of churches have disaffiliated, something like that. But a lot of churches that even if they had a vote but stayed, have experienced impact there.
The last number I saw from GCFA was 30%.
Okay.
Of U.S. churches.
Of
U.S. churches.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Well, that's a substantial change. And yet there is future. Kelly, we first met at jurisdictional conference, right? And I had been told, I'm a newbie delegate for Central Texas. I had been told a lot of horror stories of what happens at general conference and at jurisdictional conference, and be ready for the bloodbath, or be ready to try to elect bishops on 47 ballots, or any number of things, right?
Yeah.
And jurisdictional shocked me, right? It was in no way what I had been prepared for, right? It was beautiful. It was holy. We did hard things, but we did them in it with a unified spirit, right? You talked about consensus, Tim, right? That was there. What was your experience of jurisdictional conference, and what do you think that might play into what we might experience globally at general conference?
Yeah, I mean, you described my experience, and except that mine was also crowded in just shock, because I had been at 16, and that was a really tough central jurisdictional conference, and 16 was really painful. And so I not only had the stories of what it would take, I also had an experience that was really painful at jurisdictional conference. And so the collaboration, the work we had done to get there, and then for, they call themselves, I think, the triplets now, the 3 bishops getting elected on the first ballot, right? I was shocked. Like, I just looked around in shock. Someone's going to take this away before I could really get to the point to celebrate and sink in the emotions. So I remember just kind of looking around the sanctuary and watching everyone else as they celebrated and just letting that moment sink in. Part 2 of your question.
Yeah. Will there be a connection or impact at general as you?
Yeah. So that's my inner hope, right? Is that everyone at General Conference gets to experience what we did at South Central Jurisdiction. And therefore to not take for granted all of the collaboration, all of the work, all of the really honest conversation that had to go in to get to that moment, right? We had to talk about really difficult things. We had to talk about some of the harm that was done at previous jurisdictional conferences and in our delegations and overcome some of that. And so I have hope that we can have a similar experience at General Conference, and want to remember that took a lot of people doing a lot of really good work and being really vulnerable, and that we still are doing that and can do that as we approach for General Conference as well.
That is my hope too. And as you talk about the hard work ahead of time, right? The relationally vulnerable work, the work of listening, not just talking, right? And truly hearing from our brothers and sisters, right? As I've not been on the inside process of anything with this regionalization movement, right? But my understanding is that it comes from a community that is worldwide, right? It comes not just from a select few power brokers, to quote Hamilton, in the room where it happened, right? This is not where's the U.S. Capitol going to be, right? And none of us have to be Aaron Burr looking in from the outside going, what happened? We missed it, right? But that it's been a collaborative movement toward this idea of regionalization. You need to know, Kelly, that Clayton last week on a podcast set you up, right? He set you up, he teed you up, I guess I should say. It didn't set you up. As one of our leading experts in this regionalization process, somebody who understands it better than most of us do, or even will, in advance of it becoming a potential reality in the United Methodist Church, right? A real structure and system shifter to empower ministry for a new generation. Can you take a few minutes and walk us through some of the points of regionalization, kind of beginning at the high level and then maybe moving into what has your attention, what you are most interested in, or even what do you think might be the most impactful piece of it?
Yeah. I'll do my best. I don't know that I can live up to Clayton Oliphant's description, but we'll try.
You'll be great.
Yeah. I mean, so what you first started with, right, the collaborative nature. And so what we're looking at right now is worldwide regionalization. So a collection of 8 petitions. Part of the gift that all of these delays, there are some gifts in all of the delays of General Conference, and some of that is time. And so we talk about collaboration. We've had time for many groups that were offering petitions on regionalization to 2020 to start working together. And so a grassroots movement out of the central conferences conferences that put together the Christmas Covenant. It was predominantly members of central conferences that put those pieces of legislation together. They not only had time to do that themselves and get it so far that even in North Texas, I don't know if y'all brought it to Central Texas, but we affirmed the Christmas Covenant at one of our annual conferences as a path towards regionalization.
And just a note for those of us who are new to General Conference, right? Central conferences are those United Methodists outside the United States, right? The gatherings of United Methodists. So what you're inviting us to remember is the worldwide nature of where this legislation has come from.
And that because we operate in English, which is the U.S. language most dominant, it is really challenging to participate in our legislative process when English is not your first language, and at the speed that it goes, and the turnaround every 4 years, and the deadline. So to have time for a diverse group of people who speak multiple languages coming from multiple places on the globe to write legislation together, and then present that, and the U.S. Church to also be able to receive it and understand it and pass it. Like, that's a huge endeavor alone. So then now there's that Christmas Covenant, and then the Connectional Table, which is one of our general agency bodies of the church.
Right.
They also had legislation coming. The U.S. as regional conference was theirs. So those two entities have come together now through a general conference committee called the Standing Committee on Central Conference Matters.
Okay.
So I don't know the history of it as well as someone like George Howard does. Maybe you do, Tim. But the Standing Committee on Central Conference Matters meets during General Conference, but it also is the only legislative committee that has the ability to meet outside. And so it has gathered in the last year or so and taken what is the best from the from the Connectional Table legislation, the best from the Christmas Covenant legislation, people that have worked on both of those, and people that are new, that are part of the Standing Committee on Central Conference Matters, which is predominantly people from our central conferences, have all come together to pick the 8 best pieces of that legislation and bring it forward as the worldwide regionalization legislation.
You know, that is just life-giving and hope-giving. I mean, the legislation aside is really important and really good, and we're going to get into what it does here in just a little bit. But to hear witness to the impact of this delay, right? I'll confess, even as a newbie delegate, right? I kept going. I got elected in 19. We were going to go in 20, and then we were going to go in 22. It's like we just keep twiddling our thumbs, all with good reason, right? They're very important reasons for the delays, but so often, or how often, do those delays not lead to different or better action, just lead to a delay in what would have been? But to hear that the church seeking its new direction, seeking this kind of new structure for a new season, for almost a rebirth, right? Used that time, right?
Absolutely.
For really good. That is such, I know I'm a Methodist nerd, but it's so good to my soul to hear that. Thank you for framing it that way and giving it to us in that way.
It really is, Kelly. I love the way. I mean, I hadn't really thought of it in those terms. The gift of the delay, and that's really helpful. And it is what enabled those bodies to come together with one very well done piece of legislation that all 3 bodies have endorsed.
Yeah, I mean, I think the anomaly, it'll be great for some doctoral student or maybe do a study very specifically on how often does a grassroots community get to rise up and propose something, and then an institutional body like the Connectional Table, and is more common. But then for those two to come together and put something forward, I mean, just even that, the overlap, the integration of institutional body and grassroots movement, I think is novel in and of itself.
Yeah. The Holy Spirit may have
Holy Spirit might be out there and working in that, yeah.
Maybe, and could we think of the delays as a form of Sabbath that created enough space to breathe that then the communities came together? Does that make sense? I mean, I don't know. It's not perfect, but it could work. It could work.
Yeah.
As we look at the worldwide regionalization, we talked a little bit last time about kind of what regionalization might mean in a U.S.-centric kind of context, right? Meaning that it would make General Conference about kind of truly worldwide matters, and that, the U.S. would vote on U.S.-centric issues, and the other regions of the world would vote on more regionally specific issues. What else do those 8 petitions, what, as the core of those 8 petitions, what is the core of that regionalization?
I mean, I think I would concur with you, right? The core is for us to, for everyone to across the globe to be able to really talk about what it is that they need to do, the parts of the discipline that will be able to be adapted by everybody are administration and things to align with local law, right? Not making the entire globe, you may have touched on this with US-centric, talk about United States pension and healthcare, right? But
it is the shining example.
The shining example, right?
Because
Like,
if it's not relevant to you, it's a waste of your time, right?
Yeah.
A lot of time.
A lot of time.
A lot of time, yeah. So to elevate everyone to a level of equity so that across the globe we can spend time together at General Conference equally on important matters spiritually, theologically for the church across the globe, not just US-centric. And then when you're in your regional areas, being able to adapt the sections of the discipline that we can to meet the law and the culture and the way the church is carried out in your very diverse regional context.
Yeah. Well, it feels like in its own way. I've served 6 churches under appointment in the last 15 years, and we were all United Methodists, and we were all generally in Central Texas, right? But each church and community that it was grounded in had its own distinctive culture and opportunity. So the ministry had a lot of unifying characteristics, but it looked different in different places in different ways. This feels like the going worldwide in scale with a similar kind of idea, an acknowledgement that all of God's children are aiming for the same thing, right? But we may get there different ways. Or we may, there may be administratively and structurally and otherwise things that need to be different in different parts of the world to best equip us for ministry, right?
There absolutely are. I mean, right? Like we talk about the connection, and so it's kind of a grand experiment in the level of connection that you can carry out globally, because it's not that it may need to be, but it is. I mean, when you think about the Philippines, Eastern and Western Europe, different parts of Africa, North Katanga, Congo, these sorts of places, any number of states in the United States, New York to Texas to California, right? Idaho, Washington, it's all
Dallas to Fort Worth.
We're gonna figure that out. But
Really, you're gonna bring God as
yeah, like it's not May. Like the church has to exist differently in these places, and yet still John Wesley behind you, right? Yeah. We have John Wesley core tenets of faith and doctrine that we can carry out together. Yeah. But we're going to need some room to let each other do ministry in our places. We just need that room.
Yeah, we do. Well, and I think that is such a powerful opportunity for us, right? And so, as Kim reminded us last week, right, part of that opportunity is at General Conference, right? But it also, because this is such a structural change, such a substantial structural change, it continues after that. We have ratifying votes at annual conferences. In the U.S. here would be in 25, I believe. So our first unified annual conference, right? We would have a vote on this kind of a matter to affirm it because it's a constitutional amendment, and it requires a 2/3 majority within all of the annual conferences.
Right, it's the aggregate number of votes cast in all the annual conferences, 2/3 of those votes. So it's not 2/3 of annual conferences, but 2/3 of all the people voting in all the annual conferences worldwide.
But for your folks that want to deep dive in it, here's a clue to go searching for. There's 8 petitions being proposed in the worldwide regionalization. The first one is the one that needs ratification. So there's 7 other items that will happen. Some of those are directly affected by whether or not the first one gets ratified. But there's other parts of that, like another team to start working on what a regionalized church would be. That can be formed while we're doing ratification. And there's things that can happen in those 8 pieces that those folks that want to really deep dive in it. There's some things that will go into effect by just a simple majority vote at General Conference. And then there's this one constitutional part about the structure of the church that will take 2/3 vote at General Conference and then 2/3 ratification.
Okay. That's an important reminder. We talk about the, and I've heard it from the outside in previous General Conference. We talk about whatever the big plan is, like it's a single thing.
It's an all or none.
It's an all or none kind of. these are 8 distinct petitions, right, that are going to get voted on individually as a part of the process. One of the other things that I think is coming up because of the extended time frame here is that we've got a renewed book of resolutions and a revised social principles. Both are potentially coming before. Can y'all spend a little bit of time, for those of us who have only seen the spine of the book of resolutions on the bookcase here and maybe not have flipped through, can you talk about the function of our social principles in the life of our church and our book of resolutions in the life of our church? And why does it matter that those are coming to the fore as we come to General Conference this time as well?
Well, all of the resolutions are up for renewal or non-renewal at this General Conference. And that's important. I mean, you can see from the width of the book, there are a lot of resolutions. And those resolutions are witnesses to what how we understand ourselves to be and what our witness is and what our work is in the world and what we stand for. And so and all of them are, sunsetting unless they're renewed. And so that'll be an important work of the General Conference. And that's a lot of work that will come before the conference. But that's where we are because of...
And those resolutions are often where, like, the gospel meets real life? Is that kind of a distillation there?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so they're not non-binding law of the church,
Right.
but they're guiding perspectives based out of our theology that do help us exactly where our faith intersects with the world. Here's what we as the United Methodist Church have thought on that. And so a lot of them will come back exactly as written or with some dates updated or some evolution in science that has happened in the last 8 years.
Yeah.
But a lot of it will be reaffirming what we have already believed. And so I'm interested to hear, because there's so many of them coming up, if some people find new things that they maybe didn't know the Methodist Church, United Methodist Church had a stance on, right? But it's not really new. It's something that has been in that Bible book for quadrennium after quadrennium.
Right.
In what way, with the book of resolutions and the social principles, talk us through the distinction between the two, right? And how they function within the life of the church.
Well, one thing that is evident right away, the social principles are in the Book of Discipline.
Right.
So their place in the documents of the church is much more prominent. And the Book of Resolutions is kind of this separate thing. And so the social principles are obviously much more concise. And they lay out our understanding of the social issues that we face in our world. And it's a worldwide book. Worldwide document, the social principles, that deal with, in some instances, issues that we don't necessarily face in the United States, but perhaps is a significant issue in Africa, for example. Yeah, and so it is a global document, a worldwide document that is for the whole church. And this is a revision of that document. And we can talk about some of the things. I mean, one of the things is the removal of harmful language that is in our social principles related to the LGBTQ community. I think that's a significant place. It's just it's the removal of that language. Yeah. I don't know what else we would want to touch on with.
So in part that's consistent with the revision of the social principles done by the Board of Church and Society was a long process, and the Board of Church and Society has representations nominated through General Conference from across our global church. They had talking groups. They went out and then they sent it out and had people submit the form and get that right. They have collected thousands upon thousands of United Methodist responses to them writing. But one of the big motivating factors was, as we move towards this being better at being a non-US centric global church to being a more equitable global church. How do we write our social principles to also not be US centric? And so all issue, taking things and incorporating language that's used. So in the United States, we speak about racism. In other parts of the world, it's tribalism, and it's just different. The words are different in different contexts, and so making our social principles global in nature.
Yeah. So we're not only structuring for a new day, we're naming some vision and values for a new day as well, or at least we're having that opportunity.
And a way to learn about each other. One of the most powerful ways I feel like I've used the social principles is with a youth academy, and we would go kind of to a local urban area, and we would find a statue or a government building or something that matched up with a social principle and read it and engage with it, and we would learn about what the church believes for these, adolescents in the church and the United Methodist Church. And what I really am excited about as I read through the revised social principles is that we'll take the conversation not just to how this interacts with my government here, but also how it's reflective of the way in which the world works. Because we're being more inclusive in our language overall, it's not just the U.S. political community, it's going to speak to the global political community, the global nurturing community, the global social community. So we'll be able to learn not just about our church and our place, but our church around the globe, which is really who we are.
Connected. From beginning to end, locally and globally, it is who we are. Kelly, thank you so much for being here today. Tim, thank you so much for being here on the podcast. You have blessed us all and our whole podcast community with a little more understanding as we move into General Conference 2020 in 24. I want to be selfish real quick with you before we hit stop on our recording thing today. Again, as I shared with you, I'm new to General Conference. This is my first time. And so I would love to hear one essential from each of you, a General Conference survival essential from each of you, just to help a new guy out here. It'd be great.
You want to go?
I do, and I'm going to cheat because I want to speak to your congregants too, right?
Okay, yeah.
So I would say the essential, this is just my learned travel essential, is an extension cord. Hotels are better, but an extension cord is an essential. And then the other is a care package. If you are listening and you have a delegate in your community or your church, find a way to get a care package to them. That was something life-giving from my church community when I went before.
No, that's a great idea.
I'm going to call
I've
it
never
essential.
gotten a care package.
I'm so sorry. You're welcome to be part of Union Mission Congregation. They are more verbal care packages.
Tim, I'm going to tell you, beat that, but I don't know that you're going to. So
you need to take care of yourself, and so there's a lot of sitting.
Okay.
A lot of sitting, and so be sure that you walk every chance you get. And there's always a prayer room at General Conference that is set up to help you recenter whatever else is going on.
Yeah.
And so take advantage of that.
Thank you, Tim. Thank you, Kelly.
Thank you.
Thank you for being with us on Pod Strangely Warm. Until next time, I'm Daniel Hawkins. This has been Pod Strangely Warm. If you enjoyed our conversation today, know that you can find us anywhere you find podcasts. On Spotify, Apple Podcast, YouTube, any and all the places, we are there. So if you want to continue the good United Methodist conversation that you've been a part of today, find us, like us, rate us, review us, and share with a friend so that the good news that is happening right here in our own midst can amplify even more.